Imagine a vault so secure that it's considered impenetrable. Yet one dark night it's emptied without a trace. This is the story of the most daring heist in US history. A high-stakes true crime thriller that unfolded in the shadows of America. In an era when the prevalence of cameras, silent alarms, and high-tech tracking have made old-school bank heists nearly extinct, a crew of exceptional thieves dared to challenge the odds. By the time the sun rose, authorities were left scratching their heads at an empty vault and a crime scene with no clues. How did they do it? And who were the masterminds behind a heist so bold that it shook the nation's financial system? Keep listening. Every minute of this story will pull you deeper into a rabbit hole of intrigue, audacity, and suspense. Meet Elias Finch, a quiet, calculating man in his early 40s with a past cloaked in secrets. By day, Elias was an unassuming security consultant. By night, he was haunted by the legacy of his father, a bank manager who was unfairly blamed for a major theft decades ago. Determined to clear his family name and outwit the very system that scapegoated his father, Elias set his sights on an ambitious target: a Federal Reserve cash depository on the outskirts of Chicago. This wasn't just any bank vault. It was a fortress-like facility rumored to handle vast sums of money daily. In fact, insiders knew that its vaults could hold billions of cold, hard dollars at any given moment, with around $200 million flowing in and out each day. To Elias, it represented the ultimate challenge: cracking the safest safe in America. Elias believed that pulling off the most daring heist in US history would require meticulous planning, nerves of steel, and a crew of specialists as crazy as he was. His ambition wasn't driven merely by greed. It was personal. If you're going to break the rules, Elias thought, why not break the ones written in unbreakable vault doors? The plan he was hatching would make every other robbery look like petty theft, but he knew he couldn't do it alone. To execute a heist of this magnitude, Elias handpicked a team of extraordinary misfits, each a master of their craft. He spent months scouting the underground and old contacts, looking for people with very specific skill sets. One by one, they assembled in a dingy Chicago warehouse under absolute secrecy. Marisa Mars Delgado, a former bank IT specialist turned ethical hacker. Mars could bypass digital security systems in her sleep. She once exposed a flaw in a major bank's firewall that could have been exploited to drain millions, a fact she never shared with her employers. If anyone could quietly shut down alarms or loop CCTV footage, it was Mars. Dante Russo, a veteran safecracker pushing 60, with a criminal record going back to the 1980s. Dante was a legend in the underworld. Rumor had it he could feel the heartbeat of a vault door through his stethoscope. He had cracked old-school combination safes and modern electronic locks alike. This job's vault was his ultimate test: newer, smarter, and more impregnable than any he'd seen. Jonah Brooks, a logistics expert and getaway driver. A former race car mechanic from Detroit, Jonah knew engines and city streets inside out. He was the one who could obtain vehicles, customize them, and, when the time came, outdrive anyone, even with half the Chicago PD on his tail. Jonah also had a knack for planning escape routes like a grand master plotting chess moves, complete with decoys and backup plans. Sienna Torres, an ex-employee of the very same Federal Reserve depot they planned to hit. Sienna had worked as a junior vault manager before a round of layoffs left her bitter and seeking payback. She brought invaluable inside knowledge, blueprints of the facility, insight into guard schedules, and even a functional keycard she'd forgotten to turn in. Sienna wasn't originally part of Elias's circle, but when she quietly offered her intel in exchange for a cut, Elias knew she was the wild card they needed. Each member had their motivations: money, revenge, thrill. But under Elias's laser-focused leadership, they shared a common goal: pull off the impossible. In their secret meetings, Elias laid out the challenge before them in plain terms. We either make history or we become history. The crew's eyes gleamed at the prospect. They were in. Before a single step could be taken towards the vault, Elias drilled one principle into his team. Information is power. The crew launched into an exhaustive reconnaissance phase that lasted for months. They studied the facility from every angle, quite literally. Jonah flew a rented hobbyist drone over the compound at night to map out blind spots and rooftop access points. Meanwhile, Sienna sketched the interior layout from memory, pointing out security camera placements and the thick concrete walls that encased the vault like a giant tomb.
What they were up against was daunting. The depository was protected by state-of-the-art motion detectors, heat sensors, and a 24-hour armed guard presence. A direct assault was out of the question. The crew needed to find weaknesses, any gaps in the security armor they could exploit. Mars dug into the facility's cyber defenses and discovered something interesting. The security system ran on a slightly outdated software platform that hadn't been patched in a while. It was a small crack in the digital armor, but enough for her to slip in a custom piece of malware that could temporarily blind the cameras and sensors on command. Still, that alone wouldn't be enough. They had to be physically smart too. Sienna's insider info revealed a critical window of opportunity. Every Friday night, the depot took in enormous cash deposits from local banks and casinos to hold over the weekend. Trucks would roll in until late, filling the vault with money that wouldn't be processed or shipped out until Monday. By early Saturday morning, the vault would be overflowing with unprocessed cash. Tens of millions of dollars stacked high. And, crucially, the staff would be minimal. This was their moment. Strike in the pre-dawn hours of Saturday, when the loot was at its peak and human vigilance at its lowest. Elias insisted on rehearsals and contingency planning, reminiscent of the famous Brinks job crew that painstakingly charted operational hours and even duplicated keys in advance. In a rented storage unit across town, they built a crude mock-up of the vault door based on Sienna's specifications. Dante spent hours practicing the lock sequence until his fingers knew every dial by feel. They ran simulations of the break-in over and over, timing each step with a stopwatch. If any phase took too long or left them exposed, they revised the plan and practiced again. Patience was their mantra. Just as the Brinks burglars had run through their heist half a dozen times in rehearsal, Elias's crew drilled their operation until it was second nature. They also prepared for Murphy's Law. Anything that could go wrong. Mars set up backup communications via radio in case cell jammers were in the area. Jonah procured not one, but 2 getaway vehicles. A nondescript white delivery van to use initially, and a second vehicle hidden in a parking garage a few miles away for a quick switch and decoy. They stocked the van with tools, a thermal lance for cutting, climbing gear, aerosol spray cans, and even a homemade EMP device Mars had rigged from an old microwave, intended as a last resort gadget to fry any electronic trackers or alarms if needed. During their intel gathering, Elias had studied the great heists of the past for inspiration and cautionary tales. He pored over FBI case files and newspaper archives about legendary robberies. The crew knew that at the time of the Lufthansa heist in 1978, stealing just $5.8 million in cash and jewels was enough to set a record. Elias smirked at that figure. They were aiming for 10 or 20 times that amount. He reminded the team how previous thieves got caught. A getaway driver who parked illegally and drew police attention. A crew member who left fingerprints in a hideout. An inside man who couldn't keep his story straight. This gang would make none of those mistakes. No witnesses, no violence unless absolutely necessary, no loose ends. Quietly, Elias also implemented a secret failsafe of his own. He marked a handful of the duffel bags they would use for cash with an ultraviolet dye
visible only under blacklight. Why? He hoped it would help identify any traitor who might try to steal extra for themselves, or serve as evidence if someone outside the crew somehow got hold of the money. It was a silent insurance policy, one even his closest partners in crime didn't know about. With the plan ironed out to the smallest detail, all that remained was to hold their nerve and execute it. The city of Chicago went about its business, utterly unaware that a historic crime was brewing in its midst. The date was set. The heist would go down on Labor Day weekend, when the cash reserves would be huge, and the holiday lull might buy them extra time before discovery. The week before the big day, Elias gathered the crew for one last briefing in the warehouse. He looked each of them in the eye, seeing the mix of excitement and anxiety. "This is it," he whispered. "Our one shot. Stay sharp, stick to the plan, and we'll all make history. And a hell of a lot of money." They bumped fists and went their separate ways, adrenaline already surging at what was to come. Late Friday night, under the cover of darkness, a warm summer breeze swept through Chicago. The city's skyscrapers twinkled in the distance as most people enjoyed the long weekend, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. At 2:30 a.m. Saturday, a white panel van with a fake plumbing company logo quietly pulled onto a side street adjacent to the Federal Reserve Cash Depot. This was it. Months of planning came down to these next critical minutes. Elias, Mars, Dante, and Sienna sat crammed in the back of the van, clad in black from head to toe, gloves on, faces obscured by dark scarves and night vision goggles. Jonah stayed in the driver's seat, engine idling softly, ready for anything. They parked in a blind spot between camera poles, exactly where they had determined there was a gap in surveillance. Mars had already done her magic remotely. At 2:35 a.m. sharp, she executed the malware script she'd planted earlier. "We're dark," she whispered, eyes on her tablet. That was the signal. The depot's cameras and motion detectors just went on a brief loop, showing a whole lot of nothing to the guards in the control room. Heart pounding but steady, Elias slid open the van door. They moved with purpose. Sienna swiped her old employee keycard at a side entrance's electronic lock panel. Praying the system hadn't revoked it, she watched the light. Green. The door clicked open, and they were in, just like that. Sienna allowed herself a tiny grin of vindication. They slipped into a deserted service corridor. The building was eerily quiet, save for the muffled hum of air conditioning and their own breathing. Headsets on, the crew communicated in terse whispers. Mars stayed near the entrance hub, jacked into a security terminal she'd prepared to override. Her job was to monitor the digital side and keep the electronic eyes blind for as long as possible. Elias, Dante, and Sienna proceeded deeper, passing offices and counting steps according to the floor plan in their heads.
At a junction, a lone security guard nearly walked right into them. He was coming around a corner, flashlight in hand. In a split second, Elias pressed flat against the wall in the shadows, holding his breath. Sienna and Dante did the same on the opposite side. The guard was humming softly, oblivious. As he started to pass, Elias sprang out and seized him in a chokehold, firmly but not viciously. The poor guard managed only a stifled yelp before Sienna helped gag and zip tie him. They dragged him gently behind a large filing cabinet in a side room. The guard's radio crackled, another guard asking if everything was all right. Perhaps he caught a glimpse of something on a half-functioning camera. Dante, thinking fast, grabbed the receiver and imitated the guard's voice in a few muffled words. "All good here. Damn raccoon in the trash again." A pause, then a scratchy reply. "Copy that." The crew exhaled. That was close. Regrouping, they reached the heavy steel doors that led to the vault antechamber. Of course, it was locked with a sophisticated electronic passcode. Here, Sienna's intel shone. She knew the master code was changed every week, but it was written, ironically, on a sticky note in the supervisor's office.
A careless practice she'd remembered. She had guessed it might still be the case. Sure enough, earlier that day she had sneaked into that office on the pretense of picking up her last paycheck and caught a glimpse of 6 digits on a yellow note hidden under a keyboard. She tapped them in now. Beep, beep, beep. 6 tones, and the door's LED turned green. Click. They were 1 door away from the main vault. Inside the antechamber, the huge circular vault door loomed before them, a gleaming metal titan securing untold riches. Even in the dim light, the sight made Dante's eyes widen in appreciation. This vault had both an old-school combination lock and a modern biometric sensor. Mars had temporarily disabled the biometric reader via the system hack. It would stay in standby, not triggering any alarm for a little while. But the combination still had to be dialed in by hand, and only a select few people in the world knew that code. This was Dante's moment. With practiced calm, he placed his stethoscope against the vault's cold steel and began to turn the dial ever so slowly.
While Dante worked the lock's tumblers, the others set about their tasks. Elias and Sienna carefully affixed small devices to the vault door's hinges and around the frame, magnetically clamped jammers that Mars had built. If Dante couldn't open it in 10 minutes, these devices could emit an electromagnetic pulse to temporarily disable the vault's electronic deadbolts, in theory. But using them risked frying the loot or triggering failsafes, so they were a plan B at best. Beads of sweat formed on Dante's brow despite the air conditioning. He closed his eyes, listening intently to the faint click, click as he rotated the dial. Each correct number was a hurdle overcome. For a moment, his mind drifted back to an old vault he cracked in '89, much simpler than this monstrosity. But he shoved the nostalgia aside and refocused. Within 8 minutes, a soft clunk sounded from inside the door. "Got it," Dante whispered, almost in disbelief. He had found the combination by feel. The massive bolts retracted. Together, Elias and Sienna spun the wheel handle of the vault, muscles straining as the 10-ton door slowly swung open. Their eyes widened at the sight that greeted them. Pallets and shelves loaded with cash bundles stretched from floor to ceiling. Even in the faint emergency lighting, Mars had killed the main lights to avoid cameras. They could see bricks of currency stacked high, some in open carts ready for processing. It was more money than any of them had seen in their lifetimes. The smell of paper money, a dry, unmistakable scent, hit them immediately. For a split second, the crew stood frozen, awed. Here lay tens of millions of dollars in used bills, maybe more. Elias snapped to first. "We're not here to admire it. Load up." They sprang into action, whipping out duffel bags. Dante, his hands still trembling from the adrenaline of cracking the lock, began hauling out bundles of $100 and $50 bills. Elias directed them to focus on the highest denominations, recalling how one famed crew had prioritized large bills to maximize value per pound. "Big bills only. We take as much as we can carry, nothing more," he hissed. Sienna, who had dreamt of this moment through many bitter nights, moved with purpose. She knew where the juiciest stashes would be. She led Dante to a wheeled cart loaded with shrink-wrapped bricks of 100s that had come from Las Vegas casinos earlier that evening. Each brick was labeled $100,000. They shoveled them into bags. Elias had his eye on a different prize. A certain shelf where bags of uncirculated new bills lay sealed. The facility sometimes held fresh cash ready to distribute to banks. New bills had sequential serials and could be more traceable, but they were all hundreds and tightly packed. An easy $10 million per sack. He calculated quickly and decided to grab a couple of those as well. In minutes, the crew filled bag after bag, grunting under the weight. They had planned for roughly $80 million if all went perfectly, but it looked like they might exceed that. Every duffel was approaching its weight limit,
Each person had 2 large bags slung over shoulders or dragged by hand, each bag weighing about 50 to 60 pounds. The sheer weight of the cash was incredible, hundreds of pounds in total, but nothing they hadn't expected. After all, 30 million in cash weighs around 7,500 pounds, and they were aiming for more. They were right on track to haul away one of the richest scores ever. Just as they secured the last bag, Mars's voice crackled softly in their earpieces. "Guys, we have a problem. Time's up. Someone's about to notice." From her post, Mars had been watching the system. Her malware loop was about to be discovered by the system's automated diagnostics, and one of the guards in the control room was starting to frown at an unresponsive camera feed. They were seconds away from an alarm if they didn't act now. Elias glanced at his watch. They had been inside the vault for 15 minutes, 5 minutes longer than their planned max. Not good. They swung into action, each hefting their bags. Dante, despite his age, carried his load with grim determination. Sienna tapped a command on Mars's tablet, which she'd brought with her, to initiate the final phase of Mars's hack, a forced reboot of the security system. This would momentarily set off a general alert inside the building, but also reboot all cameras and alarms. A calculated chaos meant to confuse the response. Instantly, klaxons began to blare in the corridors. Beep, beep, beep. Red strobes flashed. The remaining guards would be scrambling, unsure what was happening. A malfunction or a break-in? Using the noise as cover, the crew moved swiftly out of the vault antechamber. Mars rendezvoused with them at the side entrance, clutching her laptop, as alarms whooped around them. They had expected some alarm eventually, but now they had to race the clock before police or backup security arrived.
As they exited the way they came in, one disoriented guard nearly barreled into them in the hallway, weapon drawn and eyes wide. Sienna reacted without hesitation. She was carrying a small canister of chloroform spray. A quick miss to the face and the guard staggered, dropping to the floor unconscious before he could even shout. "Sorry," Sienna muttered under her breath as they stepped over him. They pushed through the door to the outside and were greeted by the night air again. Jonah was already waiting, side door of the van open. The crew hurled the heavy duffel bags into the van with urgent speed. Elias and Jonah exchanged a knowing nod. Time for Jonah's part. As soon as the last person dived in, Jonah hit the gas. The van sped off into the darkness, leaving the depot's alarms ringing futilely behind them. But they weren't in the clear yet. Less than 2 blocks away, as they turned onto a larger road, they saw red and blue lights flashing. Police cruisers, multiple, were racing towards the Federal Reserve Depot, sirens piercing the night. The alarms had likely tripped a silent alert to law enforcement, or maybe a guard managed to hit a panic button after all. Jonah cursed under his breath, but Elias remained calm. They knew this might happen. That's why Jonah had planned a special distraction. He picked up his radio and gave a single code word to a collaborator waiting off-site. At that moment, across town, a phony 911 call reported a major chemical spill on a highway. And elsewhere, an anonymous tip came in about a suspicious package in a tourist area. These false alarms were timed to stretch police resources thin at the worst possible moment. Elias's crew had effectively created chaos in the city's emergency response. Now, as Jonah navigated the streets, they could see 2 of the 3 cruisers ahead suddenly peel off in another direction, likely reassigned to the new emergencies. Only 1 patrol car remained headed near their area. Inside the van, everyone held their breath and stayed low as the lone police cruiser approached from the opposite direction. Jonah did something unexpected. He flashed the van's headlights at the cop car and slowed down, mimicking the behavior of a courteous driver yielding to police. It worked. The officers zoomed past, barely giving the plain white van a second glance. Within seconds, the sirens faded behind them. Relief washed over the crew in the van, but Elias knew they couldn't celebrate yet.
Sticking to their rehearsed plan, Jonah drove calmly, not too fast, observing all traffic laws to avoid attracting attention. Just a van on an early morning delivery run, nothing to see here. They headed toward a quiet industrial district where the second getaway vehicle awaited. Mars checked her watch and local police scanner frequencies on her phone. As expected, a flurry of reports were now describing a break-in at the Federal Reserve Depot. Helicopters would likely be in the air soon. Time was short. They reached an abandoned warehouse lot where an innocuous blue delivery truck was parked, their switch vehicle. It was a larger truck already loaded with empty cardboard boxes to resemble a courier shipment vehicle. Importantly, it could hide the crew and their loot in plain sight for the next phase of escape. The crew swiftly transferred the duffel bags of cash from the van into the back of the truck, burying them under the piles of decoy boxes. They also wiped down the van for prints and DNA, and set a simple, timed incendiary device under the driver's seat. In 15 minutes, the van would be up in flames, destroying any evidence and confusing investigators further, as they'd think perhaps the thieves torched their own getaway vehicle. Elias took the wheel of the new truck now, with Jonah beside him, since a delivery truck would more likely have two up front. Mars, Dante, and Sienna squeezed into the back, nestled among the boxes. There was an air-conditioned compartment to keep them cool and conscious. They pulled out of the lot just as a distant thump and orange glow signaled the van being destroyed behind them. By the time police eventually found that charred van, Elias's crew would be long gone. Dawn was just beginning to break, the sky turning navy blue as they headed onto the interstate. New reports on the radio suggested roadblocks were being set up on major routes out of the city. But Elias had anticipated this too. Their path took them away from obvious routes. They drove toward a neighboring suburb as if making a routine delivery. A police chopper did thunder overhead at one point, but seeing only a common delivery truck amid morning traffic, it did not linger. The crew remained stone-cold silent as they passed a state trooper pulling onto the highway. The trooper paid them no mind. Within an hour, they were over 50 miles from Chicago. At a quiet rest stop, they regrouped and finally allowed themselves a moment to breathe and acknowledge what they'd done. They had actually done it. The biggest cash heist in American history. By Elias's estimate, they had over $90 million in the truck. Never before had anyone stolen so much from a U.S. financial institution in a single stroke. The record books would have to be rewritten. And yet, unbelievably, no one was hurt, and the authorities still had no real leads on who pulled it off. It was almost too perfect. Elias directed them onward to a prearranged safe house, a barn on a remote farm, owned by a friend of a friend who asked no questions. There they unloaded the money and swapped vehicles one final time, splitting into two SUVs. The plan was to lay low separately for a while, then reconvene once the heat died down to divvy up the cash. They shared congratulatory hugs and even a few tears of joy and disbelief. Dante, the hard-bitten safecracker, actually laughed and said, "In all my years, I've never seen a haul like this. Hell, my grandkids' are set for life." Mars, ever the techie, quipped, "I can't believe we freaking ghosted the Fed. This is one for the darknet legend forums." Sienna just shook her head with a satisfied smile. The vault that had once been her pride as an employee was now her crowning triumph as a thief. Elias allowed himself a tight-lipped smile as he watched his crew celebrate. They had done it. But deep down, he was already thinking of the aftermath. He reminded everyone sternly, "Lay low. Don't spend anything big or flashy. We move slow and smart, just like we planned." They all agreed, knowing the next few weeks would be critical. Little did they know, the drama was not over yet. The discovery at the Federal Reserve Depot that Saturday morning was nothing short of shocking. When the day shift employees arrived and found the vault gaping open and empty, panic ensued. Law enforcement swarmed the scene within hours. FBI agents, local police, forensic teams, all trying to figure out how a supposedly secure vault was cleaned out under their noses. There were no tripped alarms or motion detectors during the break-in. The only alarm had been a generic system reboot warning, which left investigators baffled. There were no clear images on any camera. The CCTV footage showed either static or benign loops of empty corridors during the estimated time of the heist. It was as if the vault was robbed by ghosts. Evidence was scarce. They found 2 unconscious guards, one still gagged, who reported being jumped by a group of shadows. Neither got a good look at the thieves. A burned-out van was found in the city, which forensics tied to the heist, but it yielded no useful clues. The fire had seen to that. The precision of the operation led investigators to suspect an inside job or an extremely skilled team. Sienna's name inevitably came up, since she was a former employee, but she had a solid alibi. She was purportedly visiting family out of state, using fake timestamps and photos Mars had arranged. With no fingerprints, no DNA, and no camera footage, the case was a nightmare for the FBI. This was unprecedented, the largest vault robbery in US history, and they were practically empty-handed on leads. News of the heist dominated headlines. $100 million vanishes in daring Federal Reserve heist, blared the New York Times. Though the exact amount was unclear, estimates ranged from $75 million to $100 million plus missing. TV pundits speculated on who could be behind such a brazen crime. Was it a crime syndicate? A rogue special forces unit? Inside men? Everyone had a theory, but no one had an answer. The public, while shocked, couldn't help but be fascinated. It was the kind of real-life thriller you'd expect from a Hollywood movie. In online forums and cafes alike, people traded wild rumors and admired the cunning it must have taken. After all, even the FBI noted that modern security measures usually deter such heists, which made this crew's success all the more incredible. Elias and his crew watched the media storm from afar, each in their own hideouts. For the first few weeks, they stuck to the plan. Stay low, no ostentatious spending, act normal. And it might have ended there. A perfect crime, story closed. If not for the one mistake that often undoes even the smartest criminals. In this case, it was a lapse by Jonah, the loyal getaway driver. Jonah had always been the most level-headed, but with millions of dollars now at his disposal, temptation got the better of him. About a month after the heist, feeling homesick and overly confident, Jonah quietly sent an anonymous gift to his estranged ex-wife, a package with $50,000 in cash, hoping to help her and their child. It was a kind thought, but a grave error. In his rush, Jonah failed to remove the Federal Reserve cash straps from some of the bundles. These straps were marked and traceable. His ex-wife, puzzled by the sudden windfall and wary of its source, noticed the official straps and did something Jonah didn't anticipate. She contacted the authorities. The FBI, already on high alert for any sign of the stolen cash, was alerted immediately. Those money straps were like a smoking gun, very much like how an honest tipster's alert about marked cash had led to arrests in the Dunbar case years before. Investigators traced the serial numbers on the bills and narrowed down their origin to the Reserve Depot theft. It didn't take long for them to connect the dots and identify Jonah as a former race car mechanic with a sudden, unexplained disappearance. Surveillance of Jonah's known associates led them further. One by one, the FBI started identifying patterns that linked to our crew members. One chilly morning, just as Dante was opening a newspaper at his small, rented apartment, he liked to keep up with news on the investigation, a swarm of FBI agents busted in and arrested him at gunpoint. Across town, Sienna, who had been cautiously planning a move to another state, was caught when agents posing as delivery men knocked on her door. Jonah was picked up trying to withdraw cash from a storage locker he'd stashed some money in. The arrests were dramatic and all over the news within hours. it seemed the perfect crime was unraveling. However, two key players were notably absent from the arrest roster: Elias and Mars. The FBI had strong suspicions about Elias. He fit the profile of the mastermind once they pieced together the crew, but they couldn't find him. When they raided Elias's known residence, they found it empty, cleaned out meticulously with no hint of where he'd gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The only thing left behind was a single playing card pinned to the wall, the Ace of Spades, perhaps a last taunt or a symbol of victory. Mars, the hacker, was likewise elusive. All traces of her digital life had been wiped. Some say she fled overseas under an assumed identity before the arrests even began, using cryptocurrency and false passports to disappear.
The captured crew members, facing heavy charges, initially clammed up. They knew Elias had contingency funds and lawyers on standby for them. But faced with the prospect of decades in prison, Jonah, racked with guilt over having inadvertently betrayed his friends, eventually cooperated with authorities in hopes of leniency. His testimony filled in many blanks about the planning and execution of the heist, astonishing agents with the level of detail and foresight the crew had employed. Dante and Sienna, however, remained largely tight-lipped, almost admiring in a way of how Elias had orchestrated everything. Trials followed, and the nation watched the proceedings with rapt attention. It was the heist of the century brought into the courtroom. Jonah received a reduced sentence for his partial cooperation, though he'd still serve serious time. Sienna and Dante were sentenced as well, though Dante's advanced age became a factor in a somewhat lighter sentence. The judge wryly commented that the old safecracker probably wouldn't be cracking anything more than walnuts by the time he got out. But the question on everyone's mind was, where were Elias Finch and Marisa Delgado? They had become folk heroes of a sort, the criminal masterminds who outsmarted the system and then slipped away. To this day, Elias and Mars remain at large. The FBI continues the manhunt, but rumors abound that they changed their identities and are living comfortably off their shares of the fortune. In fact, more than half of the stolen money was never recovered, making its whereabouts a mystery. Like other notorious heists, where large sums vanished into the underworld, over $50 million from this caper is unaccounted for. Money that may never be seen again. The legacy of this audacious heist is etched in crime history. It has already inspired documentaries, endless internet theories, and copycats, all of whom, thankfully, failed miserably. Security protocols at banks and federal facilities across the country were overhauled in response, a testament to how truly embarrassing the breach was. As one commentator noted, this crew showed that even in the 21st century, with all our technology and security, a brilliantly planned old-school heist was still possible, and on a scale no one thought imaginable. For the American public, the story has a tantalizing allure. It's a tale of David versus Goliath, cunning thieves outwitting a giant institution, and it's told with the suspense of a Hollywood thriller. People were glued to their screens following every update, and even now, years later, the question sometimes resurfaces: where is Elias Finch? Did he get away clean? Perhaps sipping a cocktail on a tropical beach under a false name? Or is he still lurking in the US, reinventing himself, maybe even planning something new?
No one can say for sure. What we do know is that this heist stands as the most daring in US history, not just for the jaw-dropping amount of money stolen or the flawless execution, but for the sheer audacity of taking on unbeatable security and winning. It was a story of meticulous planning, unwavering nerve, betrayal and loyalty, high-tech subterfuge, and old-fashioned lockpicking, all coming together in a criminal masterpiece. The crew may not have all gotten away with it in the end, but for those intense hours of that Labor Day weekend,
They pulled off what every thief dreams of and what every lawman fears: the perfect heist. And so, the legend lives on. The vaults have been refortified, the criminals punished or pursued, yet the tale continues to captivate us. It's a reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and sometimes the greatest stories are the ones hiding in the shadows of history, just waiting to be told. Who knows? Perhaps somewhere out there, Elias Finch is listening to this very story, a faint smile on his lips, knowing that he wrote his name into the annals of American crime lore. One thing is certain: this epic heist has people hooked, and it will be recounted for decades to come. A criminal saga of daring and ingenuity that ensures you remain glued every minute, from the first scheming whispers to the final enigmatic escape. Subscribe to this channel for more intriguing stories like this, or you tell us what interests you, and we delve deep into researching one for you. Thanks for watching.